The history of the Ottoman Empire, the empire that shouldn't have happened, but totally did. What happens when a nobody tribal chief with a glorious moustache stumbles into history and accidentally starts an empire that lasts over 600 years? Meet Osman, the man, the myth, the moustache. No one saw him coming, least of all the crumbling Byzantine Empire, who probably wished they just offered him a decent peace treaty and maybe a kebab or two. But instead, they got steamrolled. How did a tiny beylik on the edge of Anatolia suddenly become the final boss of 3 continents? How did they go from goat-herding nomads to the creators of the first modern standing army, the Janissaries, who were part elite warriors, part royal enforcers, and part, well, terrifying boy band? While Europe was too busy throwing crusades, plagues, and family feuds at each other, the Ottomans were moving like chess grandmasters. From the fall of Nicaea to the shocking earthquake that gave them a backdoor into Europe, from mysterious princess plots to 4D military campaigns led by sultans who never blinked, this wasn't just conquest. It was drama, betrayal, and domination wrapped in a turban. So buckle up, because you're about to witness a real-life Game of Thrones, with fewer dragons, more scimitars, and absolutely no chill. Because when the Thunderbolt Sultan charges, when Murad plays mind games in Serbia, and when Bayezid goes toe-to-toe with Timur the Lame, spoiler, it gets ugly, you'll realize one thing. This isn't just history, this is the Ottoman Empire's origin story. And trust me, you don't want to blink. Picture this, the year is 1299. Europe is a medieval mess. The Byzantine Empire is an aging lion with a limp, still roaring from Constantinople but bleeding from every paw. The Balkans are a royal buffet of bite-sized kingdoms, suspicious of each other and even more suspicious of soap. Meanwhile, in the Anatolian town of Sot, a charismatic and ambitious warrior named Osman, Uthman in Arabic, looks across the border and thinks, well, if no one else wants the land, I'll take it. He wasn't wrong. The Byzantines were fumbling leadership like it was a greased pig. Balkan kingdoms were too busy stabbing each other in the back to notice the dagger poking through their front. It was the perfect moment. And Osman? Well, Osman knew an opportunity when he saw one. Osman Kus, son of Ertuğrul, grandson of Süleyman Shah, or maybe not, Ottoman genealogists argue about this like it's a Thanksgiving dinner debate, was a Turkic tribal chief from the Kai tribe of the Oghuz Turks. We don't know much about him. Seriously. The man was more legend than LinkedIn profile. Most of what we do know comes from Ottoman lore, which, let's be honest, has the same historical reliability as your uncle's fishing stories. Legend says Osman had a dream. A tree grew from his chest and its branches stretched across the world. Sounds like an ad for miracle fertilizer, but this was taken as divine prophecy. Osman was destined to rule. He had charisma, a small but loyal band of warriors called Ghazis, and the opportunistic brilliance of someone who sees a failing empire and thinks, that'll do. And so, in 1299, he declared himself Sultan. Because why not? Because the Christian powers around them made one hilarious mistake after another. Constantly at war with each other, would rather side with the Mongols than each other. Their borders were open invitations for ambitious invaders, living on past glory, weak military leadership, internal civil wars so frequent they were practically seasonal. Thought Anatolia was too far to care about, underestimated the Ottomans as just another tribal nuisance. Meanwhile, Osman's Ghazis were treating border raids like weekend hobbies. By exploiting this giant Christian mess, Osman quickly turned his small emirate into a regional power. Osman's son, Orhan, took over around 1326, just after the Ottomans captured Bursa, their first real city. This was a big deal. It meant they went from glorified raiders to actual rulers. Orhan was no pushover. While Daddy Osman was a warrior poet, Orhan was more of a spreadsheet and strategy guy. Orhan's early forces were volunteers, noble in cause, but flaky in commitment. So he asked his brother Alaeddin, a statesman, not the lamp rubber, for advice. Alaeddin said, why not pay them? Revolutionary. But the real game changer came from his advisor and in-law, Kara Halil, who said, why not raise soldiers from the Christian boys we conquered, convert them, and train them from birth to serve only the Sultan? And thus, the Janissaries were born. These weren't your average medieval militia. The Janissaries were elite, well-fed, terrifying, and above all, loyal. No marriage. You're married to the state. No property. You are property, no quitting, ever. Serve the Sultan without question, even if he orders you to wear ridiculous hats, which he often did. They were trained in everything: military arts, language, music, even philosophy. Think Spartans, but with stricter HR policies. Osman died shortly after the capture of Bursa. His tomb still rests there, buried like a seed at the heart of what would become a 600-year empire. His legacy? He built a state on the ashes of a collapsing region, inspired by religious duty, tribal loyalty, and military brilliance. He left behind no biography, no selfies, no imperial tweets, but his name, Osman, echoed in every corner of the empire. The Ottomans were born of him. First things first, Enik isn't a person. It's a muddled echo of Nicaea, the Byzantine city that met the wrath of the Ottomans in 1331. Once the proud seat of the Eastern Orthodox Church, it now became an Ottoman jewel, snatched right from the trembling hands of Byzantium. Orhan Ghazi, son of Osman, had big boots to fill, and even bigger ambitions. After laying siege to Nicaea, Iznik in Turkish, he finally broke through its weakened walls after years of starving it out. The Byzantine defenders were too poor, too tired, and too confused to mount an effective resistance, like a tired goalie against a team of Messi clones. With the city in Ottoman hands, it was clear. Byzantium had a leaky roof, and the Ottomans were about to blow the house down. 4 years later, Orhan's appetite for conquest hadn't dulled one bit. If anything, it had become positively feral. This time, his eyes turned toward Izmit, Nicomedia, another Byzantine relic. A few months of pressure, a few sneaky sieges, and a lot of panic from the city's defenders led to yet another Turkish flag flying over Byzantine stone. The Byzantine Emperor, Andronikos III, was too busy trying to juggle a civil war, a broken budget, and nobles who'd rather party than fight. The kind of leadership that made the Ottomans say, "Thank you, we'll take that too." Üsküdar, or Scutari, across the Bosporus from Constantinople, soon followed. The Ottomans weren't just taking cities, they were squeezing the Byzantine capital, city by city, like a python tightening its grip on a squawking imperial chicken. By now, Orhan had developed a taste not just for blood and battle, but for Byzantine weddings. Orhan didn't just swing swords, he swung wedding rings too. He struck a political deal with Emperor John VI Cantacuzene, marrying the emperor's daughter Theodora. Why? Simple. It gave Orhan a passport into Europe and, more importantly, a green light to raid Thrace. "Darling, I'll marry your daughter if you let me burn down your neighborhood," said Orhan, metaphorically. And John VI, surrounded by civil war and desperate for help, basically replied, "Sure, just leave the wedding cake." Then came fate's perfect gift. A massive earthquake struck Gallipoli in 1354, reducing its fortresses to rubble. Before the Byzantines could even sweep the dust, Suleiman Pasha, Orhan's son, sent in the troops. Like squatters in a mansion, they claimed it all. When Emperor Cantacuzene begged Orhan to withdraw, the Sultan replied, "Withdraw? My dear Emperor, this land was clearly shaken into my hands by the will of Allah." Thousands of Turkish warriors flooded in from Anatolia, itching for a fight and a share of the loot. Byzantine panic set in. The more they begged, the more Orhan grinned, and the more Turks flooded in, the more the Byzantine Empire crumbled from within. John VI's credibility went up in flames, and civil war returned to Constantinople with a vengeance. At nearly 80 years old, Orhan's body finally gave out, perhaps broken by age, perhaps shattered by the sudden death of Suleiman Pasha, who died tragically in a hunting accident, likely involving either a wild animal or a clumsy friend with a bow. Heartbroken, Orhan passed quietly into the night, leaving behind an empire forged by his father and multiplied by his own cunning. Enter Murad I, Orhan's other son, and a man who didn't believe in half measures. Upon taking the throne, Murad took one look at the Balkan map and said, "I want it all." First stop, Bulgaria. Murad offered Ivan Shishman, Bulgaria's king, a deal he couldn't really refuse. He'd let Ivan keep his little throne if he agreed to become a vassal of the Ottoman Empire, pay tribute, provide soldiers, and shut up when the Sultan's army marched through his backyard. Ivan, nervously weighing life versus pride, chose to live. Smart man. Murad wasn't done. He gobbled up Sofia, then Peret and Niš, pushing the Ottoman crescent deeper into Europe's heart. Byzantine emperors by now had to squint from Constantinople just to catch a glimpse of free Christian territory. Then came 1389, and the blood-soaked Battle of Kosovo. Both the Ottomans and the Serbians threw everything they had into this brutal meat grinder. Murad was victorious, barely, but it came at a cost. Murad himself was assassinated during or just after the battle, allegedly by a Serbian noble who feigned surrender before stabbing the Sultan. But the Ottomans, they had depth. Murad's son, Bayezid I, nicknamed Yildirim, the Thunderbolt, immediately took over. Bayezid was fast, ruthless, and charmingly vindictive. He stomped out Karaman, crushed Bulgaria, and, with a dramatic flair, began sieging Constantinople in the mid-1390s. The Christian world couldn't sit still. The Crusade of Nicopolis, 1396, was launched with a who's who of European nobility. Knights from Hungary, France, the Holy Roman Empire, and even some Scots charged into battle, and were utterly annihilated. Bayezid didn't just win, he massacred the Crusaders. He reportedly executed thousands of nobles and soldiers personally, ensuring their kingdoms would never forget who had turned the tide. Though he had earlier made peace with Karaman, Bayezid broke it, like a man who makes a New Year's resolution only to eat cake on January 2nd. He crushed Karaman again, uniting Anatolia under one flaming Ottoman banner. His dominion now spanned the Balkans to the Euphrates. He was the mightiest Muslim leader in the world, feared in Europe, revered in Asia, and silently cursed by Christian monarchs, who now watched their borders turn Ottoman overnight. But just as Bayezid reached the summit of his power, a storm stirred from the east. Tamerlane, the Turkic-Mongol warlord, was heading west with armies more savage than any crusade could dream of. The clash of titans was imminent. By the year 1400, Sultan Bayezid Thunt, better known to his enemies as Yildirim, or the Thunderbolt, was riding high. He just walloped the Crusaders at Nicopolis, making Christian Europe clutch their pearls and Byzantium weep into their Byzantine wine. But just when the Ottoman Sultan thought he was the baddest wolf in the east, along came a real monster. Timur, the Turco-Mongol warlord who made Genghis look like a polite librarian. Timur didn't knock at Bayezid's door, he kicked it in. Their tension had been bubbling like a Turkish bath. Timur saw himself as the ruler of all Turkic lands. Bayezid saw himself as, well, basically God's gift to the Muslim world. The final straw? Both had annexed lands the other claimed, especially in eastern Anatolia. Think of it as two pit bulls eyeing the same bone, except the bone was an empire. In 1402, it boiled over at the Battle of Ankara. Bayezid rushed back through Anatolia to confront Timur, thinking he'd catch the Mongol asleep. But surprise, Timur beat him to Ankara and besieged the city. His troops? Not just vicious, strategic. They cut off the Ottomans' only water source. Yes, Timur literally dehydrated an army. Bayezid had no choice. Fight or die of thirst, and fight he did, until his army was overwhelmed by Timur's war elephants and ferocious cavalry. His troops broke, his lines crumbled, and like a Shakespearean tragedy, Bayezid tried to escape, but was captured alongside two of his sons, Musa and Mustafa. Bayezid's fate remains debated. Some say Timur humiliated him, locking him in a cage. Others claim Timur treated him with respect. Regardless, Bayezid died in 1403, a broken sultan in foreign chains. One son, Mustafa, was kept under lock and key in Samarkand until Timur's death in 1405. The other, Musa, was later released and returned to a world on fire. With Bayezid gone, the Ottoman Empire turned into a real-life episode of Survivor, Sultan Edition. The prize? The throne. The players? 4 sons, each thinking, why not me? Timur, like a chess master with a flair for chaos, declared Mehmed Çelebi the Sultan before he left. But surprise, surprise, his brothers weren't into group hugs. Süleyman Çelebi declared himself ruler in Edirne, formerly Adrianople, claiming the European half of the empire. Isa Çelebi and Musa Çelebi duked it out over Bursa in Anatolia. Mehmed set up camp in Amasya, central Anatolia, playing the long game. Isa briefly won Bursa but lost it to Mehmed, then ran to Constantinople for help, before fleeing again, and, plot twist, was murdered while relaxing in a public bath. Not the best place to let your guard down. Süleyman, who had once supported Isa, now made his move, taking Bursa and Ankara from Mehmed. This sparked the next chapter of the fratricidal saga. To even the odds, Mehmed made peace with Musa, sending him to Europe to challenge Süleyman from behind enemy lines. Genius move. By 1410, the Battle of Kosmedion saw Süleyman triumph over Musa. But Süleyman had the charisma of a wet sock. His allies deserted him. In 1411, Musa seized Edirne. Suleiman tried to flee under Byzantine protection but was caught and murdered en route. The empire had two sultans again, Musa and Mehmed. Musa, clearly holding a grudge, laid siege to Constantinople, furious at Emperor Manuel II for helping Suleiman. But Manuel pulled a reverse Uno card, called Mehmed, who rushed to Constantinople, then had to go back because of a mutiny. Back again with support from Serbian ruler Stefan Lazarević, Mehmed crushed Musa at the Battle of Çamurlu, 1413. Musa, captured, executed. Finally, Mehmed, victorious, bruised and tired, unified the empire once again. Mehmed Turs was a survivor. He spent the next years doing what any reasonable post-Civil War ruler would do, cleaning up everyone's mess. But trouble wasn't done yet. Mustafa Çelebi, the long-lost brother, remember Samarkand, came out of hiding and claimed he was the real heir. This sparked a mini-revolt, which Mehmed squashed. A preacher revolutionary named Sheikh Bedreddin also stirred the pot, mixing theology with rebellion. Mehmed didn't like the recipe. He hanged him. In 1421, Mehmed first died. Finally, the Ottoman throne passed peacefully to his son. With Mehmed gone, his son Murad II became sultan. But what's an Ottoman succession without a little sabotage? The ever-cunning Byzantine Emperor Manuel II released Mustafa Çelebi. Yes, he's back again like a soap opera villain, declaring him the real sultan. Mustafa's rebellion flared, but quickly fizzled. Murad crushed and executed him. Did Manuel II learn his lesson? Nope. He tried to use Murad's own 13-year-old brother as a puppet against him. That revolt, too, was put down. By this point, even the pigeons in Constantinople were rolling their eyes at these stunts. Murad, now secure, turned his focus outward, resubjugated Anatolian vassals who'd grown bold during the civil war, strengthened the Balkans, preparing for more expansion, got into regular fights with Venice, Hungary, and Serbia. Because why not? From the scorching plains of Ankara to the shadowy halls of Edirne, from brothers bathing with daggers to emperors besieging emperors, this 130-year Ottoman saga reads like Game of Thrones meets Islamic empire building. By 1429, the once small beylik of the Ottomans had transformed into a continental power, dominating both Europe and Asia. And though the road was soaked in blood, betrayal, and brotherly backstabbing, the House of Osman had proven one thing. No matter the crisis, the Ottomans weren't just survivors. They were conquerors. Let's begin with Murad II, a sultan who clearly wanted to retire way too early. In 1444, he abdicated the throne to his teenage son, Mehmed II. Yes, the same lad who'd later be called the Conqueror. But at this stage, little Mehmed was all stress, pimples, and zero desire to deal with the most disorganized Christian crusade in history. Enter John Hunyadi, the Hungarian warlord who was all sword and no strategy. He rallied a Christian coalition made up of Hungarians, Poles, Wallachians, led by, you guessed it, Vlad Dracula's eldest son, and anyone else who fancied stabbing a Turk. Their plan? Hit the Ottomans while they had a boy on the throne. What could possibly go wrong? Well, everything. Because teenage Mehmed II looked to the horizon, saw the storm of crusaders approaching, and basically screamed, "Dad, I'm not built for this." Murad, grumbling like a boomer forced to cancel his vacation, came out of retirement just long enough to absolutely destroy the crusaders at the Battle of Varna. It was carnage. John Hunyadi ran for his life. King Władysław of Poland was skewered mid-charge. And that Wallachian detachment? Let's just say Vlad Dracul should have kept his receipts. Murad, having dusted off his scimitar and slapped the Christians silly, promptly retired again. A man of principle, or laziness. But Europe has a short memory and an even shorter attention span. 4 years later, John Hunyadi returned with another Christian army. Yes, again. He was like that guy who loses at poker, goes home, and comes back with grandma's pension for one last game. This time it was the Battle of Kosovo, not to be confused with the one in 1389 where Murad first was killed, stabbed in the guts by a guy hiding in a bush. Classic. Murad II, now out of retirement for the second time, clearly wishing he had a better HR department, met John's forces at the Kosovo Polje and once again humiliated them. How bad was it? John Hunyadi fled again, this time captured and ransomed by the Serbs. One might think this marked the end of European military tourism in the Balkans, but oh no, this is just intermission. Murad II, finally allowed to rest and probably allergic to thrones by now, died in 1451. His son, Mehmed II, now grown, took the throne with a mission and a serious grudge. "I will do what none of these fools could do. I will take Constantinople." Mehmed wasn't messing around. He secured peace with Hungary and Venice, then built a fleet of 100-plus ships, dragged ships overland, and most importantly, he brought something new to the battlefield: cannons the size of small houses. The Byzantine Emperor Constantine V, good man, terrible luck, held out for 53 days, but on May 29, 1453, Constantinople fell. For the Byzantines, it was the end. For the Ottomans, it was breakfast. Mehmed walked into Hagia Sophia and made it a mosque. Then he styled himself Caesar of Rome, and while the Pope scoffed, the Eastern Orthodox Church just sighed and went, "Fine, you win." Now, if you thought things were getting interesting, enter the Draculas. Vlad II Dracul had sent 2 sons to live with the Ottomans as hostages. There Mehmed II got to know both. Radu the Handsome became Mehmed's BFF and Ottoman loyalist. Vlad III Dracula grew up brooding in corners, sharpening stakes and swearing vengeance. As Sultan, Mehmed supported Radu's claim to Wallachia. Vlad, however, returned to Wallachia, built a fortress of spikes, and impaled literally everyone who looked at him wrong. Even Ottoman envoys got the kebab treatment. Did Mehmed lose his mind over this? Not quite. In fact, he admired Dracula's ruthlessness. Legend says Mehmed tried to conquer Vlad's domain but eventually gave up, saying, "I cannot take land from a man who does such marvelous things." Is that admiration? Is it fear? Either way, it's peak historical drama. When Mehmed died in 1481, his son Bayezid II took over, but not without drama. His brother Shem thought he deserved the throne. Civil war ensued. Sem lost. Bayezid shipped him off to Christian Europe as a political pawn, basically an Ottoman prince on tour. Now with his throne secure, Bayezid didn't just continue conquests, he became a champion of tolerance. In 1492, when Ferdinand and Isabella expelled Jews and Muslims from Spain, Bayezid was outraged. He sent his navy to rescue them and welcome them into the empire, famously declaring, "You call Ferdinand a wise king? He impoverishes his own country and enriches mine." That's not just humanitarian, it's Sultan-level savagery. The Jews and Muslims brought science, medicine, trade, and culture. Bayezid's empire flourished. He earned the nickname Bayezid the Just. Not bad for a guy who started off cleaning up a family squabble. In the final act of this Ottoman telenovela, Bayezid's sons began squabbling over the throne. Ahmed, the preferred heir, was cozying up to the Persian Safavids. That was a big no-no. Enter Selim, the aggressive son backed by the Janissaries and military. By 1512, Bayezid II, tired of political chess, abdicated and retreated to his villa, dying a month later. Selim would become Selim the Grim, but that's a story for another episode. Spoiler alert, he takes the Ottoman Empire to new heights and slaughters a lot of people while doing it. The 15th century Ottoman Empire was less a calm dynasty and more a medieval Game of Thrones with retired sultans dragged out of hammams to crush crusades, fratricidal brothers playing throne tag, cannons the size of elephants destroying 1,000-year-old empires, Dracula as a bitter, impaling anti-hero, and a sultan who literally rescued the expelled Jews and Muslims of Spain. From Murad Tekr's battlefield comebacks, to Mehmed II's glorious conquest, to Bayezid II's justice, the Ottomans didn't just survive the 15th century. They owned it. While Sultan Bayezid II was gently sipping rosewater in his twilight years, trying to enjoy his empire like a man on a hammock with a hookah pipe, a much more chaotic reality was unfolding. Trouble was brewing in the east, and it wasn't just the morning tea. Enter the Qizilbash, fanatical Turkic warriors wearing red headgear and a red-hot hatred for the Ottomans. These were the die-hard supporters of the Safavid dynasty in Persia, and they weren't fans of Ottoman expansion into Anatolia. By 1511, they were rallying rebellions against the empire's growing dominance. Imagine loud tribal drums, swords clashing, and cries of "For Shah Ismail" echoing through the mountains. Their champion? A charismatic and very overconfident rebel leader named Shakulu, who thought he could dethrone the Ottomans like he was flipping a rug. Unfortunately for Shakulu, that rug got pulled out from under him rather quickly. He was defeated and killed, and the rebellion fizzled out faster than a wet firework. But while the East simmered with rebellion, The real drama was boiling in the west, inside the Ottoman palace itself. Sultan Bayezid's two sons, Selim and Ahmed, were at each other's throats like two lions in a golden cage. Think succession, but with scimitars and Janissaries. Ahmed, the elder son, handsome, charming, and supported by Eastern nobles, he dreamed of ruling like a poet king. Selim, the younger son, brutal, cunning, and with all the charm of a loaded musket. He preferred empire building to poetry. Bayezid, growing tired of the sibling soap opera, watched as the Janissaries, the empire's elite military force, began to favor Selim. Why? Because Selim was promising action, glory, and lots of loot. Ahmed, meanwhile, was suspected of plotting with the empire's enemies, including the Safavid Shah Ismail himself. Bayezid blinked. Selim didn't. By 1512, Sultan Bayezid had had enough. With the royal version of a shrug, he abdicated and handed the throne to Selim. He probably hoped for a peaceful retirement in a villa by the Bosphorus. He died 1 month later. Coincidence? Probably not. Now Sultan Selim, nicknamed Yavuz or the Grim, wasted no time in, well, murdering everyone who could possibly challenge him. Brothers? Dead. Nephews? Gone. Anyone with a sniff of royal blood? Executed with the precision of a paranoid chef tossing bad meat. Family Feud doesn't even cover it. This was Game of Thrones, Ottoman edition. But with the palace cleared, Selim turned outward and eastward. The Chiselbosh were still a thorn in his side. These red-hatted warriors, loyal to Shah Ismail of the Safavid Empire, were stirring rebellion again in Anatolia. So Selim sharpened his sabers and loaded his cannons. And then, in 1514, the showdown of the century happened. Shah Ismail, the Safavid ruler, was a charismatic mystic who claimed divine lineage. His troops believed he was invincible. Selim, on the other hand, had 100,000 soldiers, cannons, and muskets. It wasn't even close. Ismail's cavalry, no matter how fierce, galloped straight into a firestorm of Ottoman gunpowder. By the end of the battle, the Ottomans seized Tabriz, the Safavid capital, and Shah Ismail barely escaped with his beard intact. Selim now had his eyes on a juicier target, the Mamluks of Egypt. Longtime rivals and guardians of the Islamic holy cities. 2 major battles followed, Marj-Dabik, 1516, and Radania, 1517. Both ended in Mamluk blood, with Cairo falling and the Ottoman banners flying over Egypt, the Levant, and the Hejaz, including Mecca and Medina. Selim died in 1520, leaving behind an empire that had grown by 70%, and a legacy as one of the most terrifying but effective rulers in Ottoman history. Enter Suleiman first, Selim's only surviving son, known to the West as the Magnificent and to his own people as the Lawgiver. If Selim was the sword, Suleiman was the architect of law, culture, and empire. Suleiman couldn't change the sacred Sharia, but he rewrote the Qanun, secular laws, to be fairer, more structured, and more efficient. Taxes, land rights, criminal codes, everything was cleaned up and codified. These laws remained in use for 300 years. And while sharpening the empire's legal sword, Suleiman also wielded an olive branch. He condemned blood libels against Jews and extended religious tolerance, taking a page from his grandfather Bayezid II. But of course, Suleiman also liked conquest. A lot. He captured Belgrade in 1521 and Rhodes in 1522. Then, in 1526, at the Battle of Mohacs, the Ottomans annihilated the Hungarian army and King Louis II drowned in his armor, trying to escape. Suleiman, finding Louis's corpse, gave one of the most heartbreaking and politically savvy eulogies in history. May Allah be merciful to him and punish those who misled his inexperience. I did not wish his end would come so soon. This left Hungary in chaos. Who would rule? A power vacuum ensued between the Habsburgs and Transylvanian allies. Suleiman backed John Zapolya, a Hungarian noble who pledged loyalty to the Ottomans, while the Habsburgs tried to muscle in. To really show his displeasure, Suleiman marched on Vienna in 1529, but mud, cold, and supply issues made the siege a failure. Again in 1532 he tried, only to be stopped at Gunz by an army a fraction of his size. Vienna, it turned out, was one nut even the Ottomans couldn't crack, yet. Still, Hungary was divided into 3 zones: Habsburg Hungary, Ottoman Hungary, vassal Transylvania. The back-and-forth wars continued until a peace treaty in 1562, but that's not where Suleiman stopped. Suleiman launched 3 campaigns into Persia, playing military chess with the Safavids. Though no final victory came, A treaty in 1544 gave the Ottomans valuable gains and border stability. Meanwhile, Ottoman naval dominance exploded. Under Admiral Barbarossa, Turkish fleets smashed their European counterparts near Greece and even challenged the Portuguese in the Indian Ocean. Suleiman's empire now stretched from Budapest to Basra, Tripoli to Tabriz, Mecca to the Mediterranean. He also nudged into North Africa, and diplomacy with the Mughal Empire brought the Ottomans even closer to Asia. And yet, with all this glory, Suleiman ended his reign not in a palace but in a muddy field, at the siege of Sigetvar, where he died in 1566. But by then, the Ottoman Empire had become the single most powerful state in the Islamic world, and a major player on the global stage. From bloody rebellions and family betrayals to cannon-blasted victories and legal revolutions, the 16th century was the era where the Ottoman lion didn't just roar, it devoured. And as Suleiman's sun set over a continent trembling beneath his legacy, one thing was certain. The year was 1532, and Sultan Suleiman, Solomon the Magnificent, the lawgiver, the poet-warrior, the turbaned thundercloud of Europe, was ready for round two. Having failed to seize Vienna in 1529, you'd think he'd take the hint. But no, he loaded his wagons, polished his cannons, and said, "Let's try that Habsburg honeycomb one more time." Marching west with a swagger only a man with 100,000-man army could muster, Suleiman aimed his scimitar straight at Vienna. But alas, fate had a sarcastic grin prepared. Before reaching Vienna's stone gates, his army was stopped dead at a little Hungarian town called Guns. Now this was no mighty fortress. It was a small, sleepy hamlet defended by a few hundred men under Nikola Jurisic, who basically said, "You want Vienna? You'll have to dance with us first." Somehow, through sheer stubbornness, weather, and probably divine comedy, these defenders held off the Ottoman behemoth long enough for Vienna to slip through Suleiman's fingers once more. Tired, grumpy, and maybe a little hangry, Suleiman turned his armies back east. His conclusion? Vienna was not a prize to be plucked, but a fortress best left to marinate for a few more decades. So in 1533, Sultan Suleiman and Archduke Ferdinand I of Austria decided to give peace a shot. A treaty was signed in Constantinople. Terms were agreed. Hands were probably shaken. But treaties in the 16th century were like Venetian masks, decorative and temporary. When King János Zápolya, the Ottoman-backed vassal king of Hungary, died in 1540, chaos broke loose. The Austrians claimed the throne, Suleiman said, "Not today," and Hungary was sliced like a medieval pizza. Western Hungary went to the Habsburgs, Eastern Hungary, Transylvania, became an Ottoman vassal, Central Hungary? Oh, that became a permanent Ottoman vacation home, Janissaries included. What followed was 19 years of musical chairs, cannonballs, and treaties written in pencil, not ink. It all culminated in a truce in 1562. Everyone was tired. Their wallets were light. Even the horses needed a break. But if you thought Suleiman would now rest in his palace with wine and poetry, think again. Persia beckoned. In 1534, he launched the first of 3 campaigns against the Safavid dynasty, who were not only Persian but, gasp, Shia Muslims, a theological thorn in the Sunni Ottoman side. This wasn't just war. It was a slow, strategic, 10-year-long chess match, filled with raids, sieges, and cities changing hands like playing cards. By 1544, exhausted and sweaty, the two sides agreed to peace. The Ottomans walked away with a few shiny new territories. The Safavids got a much-needed nap. Back on water, the Ottomans weren't just marching, they were sailing, flexing their naval muscles under the swashbuckling Admiral Kılıç Ali Pasha, and earlier, the legendary Barbarossa. They danced with European fleets all around the Greek coasts, North Africa, and even the Indian Ocean, where they butted heads with the Portuguese Empire, those spicy explorers with their own spice dreams. By now, the Ottomans were no longer just landlubbing conquerors. They had become full-blown Mediterranean mob bosses. Suleiman, by this point in his 70s, was more parchment than man. But when the siege of Sigetvar called, he saddled up for one final hurrah. His army won. The fortress fell. But the Sultan? He died mid-campaign, likely exhausted from carrying the empire on his shoulders and a wardrobe heavier than a war elephant. They kept his death a secret until the siege ended. Legend has it they used his socks stuffed with herbs to delay the decay. True or not, it's a tale that sums up Ottoman grandeur and grit in a single sweaty detail. Enter Selim II, Suleiman's son. Unlike his father, Selim had two great loves, wine and women, preferably both at once. Dubbed Selim the Sot, he was the first Ottoman sultan to never lead an army into battle. Governing? That was the Grand Vizier's problem. But to his credit, he secured peace with Austria in 1568, patched things up with the Safavids again, and managed to capture Cyprus from the Venetians in 1570, prompting the infamous Battle of Lepanto, 1571, where a Christian coalition finally beat the Ottoman navy, giving Europe a rare "we won" moment. But the very next year, the Ottomans took back Tunisia. So, balance. Now Murad III, Selim's son, was a cocktail of contradictions. He waged wars but rarely led them. He expanded borders but let internal chaos fester. He fought Austria, Persia, and the Portuguese in Morocco. Inflation ran rampant, taxes soared. Even the once loyal Janissaries began to grumble. Oh, and he wrote erotic poetry and maintained a harem the size of a small city. Some say he fathered over 100 children. You decide what he prioritized. In a wild twist, he even struck a trade alliance with Queen Elizabeth I, arguing that Protestants and Muslims had more in common than either did with the Pope. Say what you will about Murad, he knew how to slide into a queen's DMs. Then came Mehmed III, who entered the throne like a Shakespearean villain, executing 19 of his own brothers to secure his power. That's one way to avoid family feuds. His reign was marked by renewed war with Austria and a rare Ottoman victory at the Battle of Kerestes, 1596, where panic turned to triumph in a miraculous rally. Yet by the end of the century, the empire was clearly showing signs of wear, economically, militarily, and politically. Even still, Mehmed managed peace with Michael the Brave, the Wallachian warlord who united Transylvania and Moldavia. Just in time, too, as the 17th century loomed like a thundercloud, and the empire, while vast, was starting to stretch thin. So by the dawn of the 1600s, the Ottoman Empire had expanded its territory by land and sea, struggled to keep internal order, played chess with both Europe and Persia, formed unlikely friendships with England, and watched its once mighty sultans become increasingly passive figureheads. From Vienna's stubborn walls to Cyprus' sunny shores, from Persian deserts to Queen Elizabeth's court, the Ottomans didn't just shape history, they wrestled with it, sang to it, seduced it, and sometimes stabbed it in a harem hallway. And the story? Far from over. Stay tuned for part 2. Coming up next, don't miss out. Subscribe and turn on notification.